and welcome to Sunset TV. You're watching Discussion Today with the host, Rajat Kane. Well, COVID-19 pandemic saw large-scale disruptions worldwide, stalling economies, infrastructure, supply chains, medical facilities, and even the way we have lived on. It was also a testimony of how the effect of disaster in one part of the world can quickly spread across the other parts of the world. Cooperation, therefore, is a must for ensuring resilience of global systems, said Prime Minister Modi while addressing the opening ceremony of International Conference on Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. The Prime Minister also underlined that infrastructure is developed for long term. If we make it resilient, we'll prevent disasters not only for ourselves but for many future generations. Well, referring to COVID-19 pandemic, the Prime Minister said it had shown how the consequences of what occurred in one part of the world could spread across the world in just no time. So, what we have to do in terms of the forward planning, discuss further on this important issue. We're joined by two guests. Mr. Yaduvendra Mathur, he is former Special Secretary in the Aayog. Many thanks for joining us, sir. And Mr. Sanjay Agarwal, he's President, PhD, Chambers of Commerce and Industry. Many thanks for joining us, sir. Let me start with you, Mr. Mathur. At the outset, your reaction on Prime Minister's suggestion as to we have to develop infrastructure in terms of planning forward, taking into consideration disasters and how it can cause a lot of disruptions. So.
Yes, so thank you. And I think what Honorable Prime Minister mentioned recently on Wednesday, that the distinction between risk and resilience when it comes to infrastructure has to be clearly understood and appreciated. And this is really a world leader, kind of showing the way, drawing from the COVID experience, that infrastructure has to serve not only smaller communities or even nations, but infrastructure should be resilient for sustainability and for environmental, for the future of mankind itself.
Right.
So that is the kind of distinction that is made when we talk of infrastructure, which should be resilient, not just mitigating against risks, but going far beyond a very limited perspective of the view of risk when it comes to infrastructure. So I think it's a much larger paradigm that has been very rightly flagged.
Right. Absolutely. Many thanks, Mr. Mathur, for your opening remarks. To stay on important paradigm that has been flagged by the Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Sanjay Agarwal, you're representing industry here. So let me start at the outset. Like, challenges that were faced by industry is pretty well known. Now, the mechanism that we have to bounce back, I mean, how challenging is that, face it? Not just the challenges alone at the first place, but challenges to bounce back.
You see, challenges to bounce back are basically because of the disaster itself, which has caused, the nature of that disaster. So if you look at the sort of disaster resilience that any economy, any country, any society would need, just to have a brief look at the challenges that we face, it could be the disaster could be a natural disaster, which is not necessarily of a predictable nature. Then there could be, of course, disasters caused by climate change. There could be disasters could be difficult to classify whether human intervention or as a matter of chance, like COVID, we are still debating whether it was caused by human intervention or it was something that was a natural phenomenon, but it is something which has put up the whole world into a suspended animation for a long time. There can be accidental disasters also, just due to any sort of carelessness, any mistake on part of somebody crucial. For example, somebody may be controlling a floodgate and a mistake in some computer processing or some mistake which could cause huge downstream issues. There could be, then there are other issues like many countries suddenly changing their stance or policies, sometimes due to, again, the disaster or situation they face, but then they have a ripple effect on others. For example, the way China suddenly banned a huge outflow of crucial inputs for the world supply chain when itself went into the COVID impact. And then some of it could have been its compulsion, some of it could have been a policy. Either way, it had an impact on the worldwide resilience of the infrastructure. And in now today's situation, cyber attacks are the other challenge, which can cause a huge disaster, many times very difficult to predict. But
Right.
many countries, electricity grids have been paralyzed. Many countries have had government systems paralyzed. So I think the nature of the disasters that can cause untold miseries to the society, to the nation are immense. And I think the Prime Minister has very with a lot of foresight, founded this organization, which is CDRI, the Coalition for Disaster Relief, Disaster Resilient Infrastructure.
Right.
I think this is absolutely something that is very prescient on behalf of the government of India and the Prime Minister. And I am very happy to note that India and UK are specifically presently working together under a new multi-country facility to support small island developing states also. In any case, this is a very huge subject, and the international coalition in which more than 35 countries, I understand, have been part of the discussions and part of the setting up of the basic outlines of the coalition. I think this is something that will need a lot of work, a lot of input, a lot of cooperation and collaboration
Absolutely.
between all nations to really reach a stage which is envisioned in this whole process.
Absolutely. A lot of cooperation between the countries so as to have synergies. And of course, like there is one goal here, resilient infrastructure for generations to come. Mr. Mathur, hypothetically speaking, whenever we look at infrastructure in terms of forward planning, how much of natural disaster, again, I'm saying be it man-made or be it natural altogether, do we take into consideration so that we decide about the longevity of that particular infrastructure or its several facets attached with it, sir?
No, absolutely. So this is a crucial issue that has always, kind of troubled, if I use the word, economists as well as policy planners. That if you are preparing for the worst kind of disasters, then there is a cost implication. And then when you're building infrastructure, you're building it for one generation, or you're building it for more than one generation, 2, 3, 4 generations. So the cost benefit trade-off and which generation will pay for that infrastructure is a key issue. So typically the compromise has been that that infrastructure that will be consumed during the lifetime of that generation should pay for that. So typically, let us say rolling stock, when you are building a railway track, the railway track will be used for maybe 100 years. But the rolling stock will be used for, let's say, 20 years. Every 20 years, the locomotives and the wagons, they will get replaced. So we can push the cost burden of the railway track to future generations, but we cannot push the cost of the wagons and the bogies to future generations. So I think this is a very simple way of looking at infrastructure funding and financing. But what the Prime Minister and this coalition that he has set up, he led it last year. He called upon countries to form this coalition, and now the global community is kind of getting together. So what he's saying is, it is the sustainable developmental goals that should be, really we should set our eyes on that 2030. And one of the sustainable development goals is a planet that is available for many future generations. So he's talking about infrastructure that does not hurt the future generations, let's say shifting to clean green energy. And the International Solar Alliance is one of the actionable points that the Prime Minister actually showed to the world in the Paris in 2015 when he and the French, the Indian leadership for the Solar Alliance is acknowledged as one of the very powerful global forces for coalitions. And like Mr. Agrawal was saying, the private sector across these countries, across continents are collaborating. The vaccine development for COVID is a great example. The kind of global energies which have got together to address a global challenge. So what the Prime Minister is really saying, the behavior change should be there and not led by greed. So what typically private sector is, we allege and we say that the private sector is driven only by greed. So I don't agree with that hypothesis. Private sector is not driven by greed. It appears that some private sector may be, but that number is small, and the larger number of private sector are very committed to green products, to sustainable manufacturing of products, and they are really the partners that are now coming into the whole infrastructure space. And the private sector thus needs policy frameworks that encourages partnerships between private sectors globally and a very strong supporting intergenerational behavioral change culture. So it is that Vasudeva Kutumbakam, the whole world is our family. That is the leadership that our ethos, our civilization has all along been sharing with the world. And I think that's what Prime Minister Modi is bringing up to the global stage, that for resilience, which is just not risk, because risk gets very small part of the whole pie. The behavior change, education of people is where we need the infrastructure to kind of be geared towards. And aviation, shipping, digital network is already there. Now what Modi is saying about one sun, one world, one grid. He's talking about a world solar bank. So energy across the world is available only from solar, and those are the kind of very big ticket infrastructure investments that the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure would kind of deliberate, and that will see light of the day. So this is very exciting development of disaster resilient infrastructure that is there on the table.
Right. Very well put, Mr. Mathur. Mr. Agrawal, your take here. I mean, Prime Minister's emphasis on, as great as Mr. Mathur summed it up, of course, like infusing or fusion of several industries worldwide so as to create infrastructure for everyone in generations to come.
I think we are practically the only nation in the world today which stands apart in having walked the talk. We hear many big words from many so-called rich and powerful nations which talk about international cooperation and internationalism and supporting the humanity and going to help out the weaker nations. But in this moment of disaster, India is the only nation which had the big heart and the courage to share the COVID vaccines, not just with a few of its neighbors, which was the first step that, of course, we took in terms of our immediate neighborhood. But we have supplied our vaccine to more than 70 countries in the world. This is what one should call resilience for the whole world, which has been provided by just one nation. So I believe strongly that the resilience of the infrastructure is also going to depend upon which nations are going to be providing the basic support and the strength for that infrastructure which any nation is building. And that has been shown that ours is a nation which is dependable, which is there. We have not denied the vaccine even to those nations with which we have political differences. We have gone out and helped one and all. I think that is what is also going to be a major building block. So disaster resilience across the world is going to also include this definition of who is the dependable partner for the infrastructure. And we as a nation have really varnished our credentials and proved our credentials. And these, as Mathur Saab just mentioned, these are things that don't change overnight. National interests, national cultures, national policies don't change overnight with the change of a government or a politician. These are long-term surviving traits of a nation. And India has survived on that same structure for the last 75, nearly 75 years, and we intend to do that for the next hundreds of years. So that is also a very important part, of course, for the infrastructure resilience. The other part is the resilience in terms of physical other assets that one needs. I think India has been a major contributor to the resilience in terms of the cyber networks. We are one of the major producers of software, major developers of software in the world. And there also we have done quite a bit from our side in ensuring that there is a minimization of risk. Of course, there will always be cyber attacks. There can always be some virus that could be introduced, and we have suffered from the virus, both of the biological kind, and we have seen so many of these viruses of the cyber kind. So I think from our side, we are taking every possible step. The Prime Minister is taking the lead in this coalition of disaster resilient infrastructure. So it is going to be a mix of actual steps that we need, actual cost choices that we make, whether what is for long term, what is for short term, and also the choices that we make in terms of partners for the resilience of the infrastructure. That's my view.
Right, right, absolutely. Mr. Mathur, like as we are about to go towards the close of show now, I mean, Prime Minister emphasized essentially also on the COVID-19 pandemic and its after effect. So again, like, I mean, taking that into consideration and theoretically speaking, now when we plan our infrastructure for future, how much of the pandemic and its length, like I mean, next week we'll complete nearly 1 year of, we have started lockdown. I know we have started off, we have unlocked, normalcy is returning slowly. But how much has pandemic changed our worldview about disasters in general? And then like, what does it educate us and the industry and our think tanks to plan ahead for infrastructure?
Yeah, that's very critical. See, I think the greatest learning is that together we can tackle any challenge that comes. I think that is one large learning. When the pandemic hit us and we went in a lockdown, and people were bottled up at home, and it seemed very gloomy. In fact, I will use the word scary. People were scared.
Absolutely.
But then the tenacity, the determination of the common man, the solutions that the common man can bring in, small enterprises, technical people, that's not only the scientists, every kind of entrepreneur, the kind of ecosystem that got built up out of this challenge is a strength. So we've not only India, but you see across the globe, these challenges throw up the best of humankind. And the vaccine development alone, or the manufacture of vaccines, technological breakthroughs, it is in these moments that the best of mankind came to the fore. And I think that is where the leadership goes out and reaches to the persons, listens to them, gets their suggestions, implements suggestions that come from across the spectrum. It is not only a small number of think tanks or researchers who are consulted. Across the board in India, we could see the teams get together, the health workers, the universities. So I think India realized, and I think this is where the strength of our economy is now, that we are Atmanirbhar. We can manage, we can manufacture, we can get together in times of crisis, and we can deliver high quality products to ourselves. What it only needs is that we put in a little hard work and we get the right encouragement and support. I think that has come as a very strong policy tool. Go out to the people, consult them, open up their energies, get them to get onto the ground, and the best will come out of a nation. And I think
Right.
that's where we are poised as we are moving towards a 5 trillion economy. And many of us have no doubt that our economy is on a V-shaped recovery. The figures are already showing. Our productions are going up. There is a small, mild dose of inflation, but I think the call for a global leadership by India is not being missed out, and we are playing that role impeccably.
Absolutely. Mr. Sanjay Agrawal, your take, I mean, taking consideration into the length of pandemic, how has it changed the worldview of industry in terms of future planning? And of course, now as we have seen the role India is playing, and yourself emphasize that we are among very few nations who actually walked the talk.
I think the world has learned a lot of lessons. To my mind, this disaster, at least for India, could also have one side effect, which could be of our being considered as among the more reliable partners in supply chains and everything. And one would hope that China plus one policy, which a lot of Western economy companies are taking, that should also, strengthen the Indian industry and India's participation in the global network. India has been very proactive even during the COVID times when there were lockdowns. I think our telecom network stood us in very good, stood up very well for us. And it was fully, the advantage was fully taken in the sense that despite all this talk of typical bureaucracy and everything, I think the government top down was so interactive and so cooperative that, we as a chamber, we held more than 100 webinars during the initial period of the lockdown. And we would always have senior office bureaucrats and even ministers available to listen to the trade and industry, talk about their problems and issues. And the best part was that there were no files moving around. Decisions were taken almost on the fly, and people's issues were sorted out. And that's how the economy was able to recover so fast. Otherwise, it would not have been possible. So I think we have shown the resilience of our system, of our iron frame of bureaucracy also. So I think in all manner, uh, we have to feel satisfied about the way we have tackled this pandemic, but at the same time, we need to do lot more while building the infrastructure. As Mr. Mathur also said, we have to make a wise choice every time, whether to save the penny today or to spend a bit more to make sure that our whatever we are building has much better and much stronger resilience to face any disaster that might be confronted with.
Well, absolutely. Many thanks, Mr. Sanjay Agrawal, for joining us and elucidating on the extremely important aspect of bouncing back in terms of economy. Many thanks, Mr. Yaduvendra Mathur, for giving us insight into how we have thought through to bounce back after getting hit by the pandemic. Well, as all good things come to end, this show also comes to end in terms of the episode. So that's it, gentlemen, for joining us. And many thanks to all our viewers for watching discussion today. Thank you. Goodbye.